Good afternoon. I'm David Ham, Mayor Pro Tem. On behalf of Mayor Allen and the City of Goldsboro, I am pleased to welcome you to the 33rd Annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Observance Day. I called it Observance Day instead of Holiday Luncheon because while we would normally be joining for a time of fellowship, good food, and great speakers, current times make our virtual event a prudent approach. Perhaps the most rewarding takeaways from our past gatherings were the messages of inspiration, the interesting and memorable stories of a speaker's personal interactions with Dr. King, and the reflections that touch one's inner soul. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, that intimate personal connection is not possible this year. But we hope our virtual Observance Day will still provide some of those precious takeaways. There is no denying that we are living in a critical, perilous time. Aside from the pandemic, we are faced with two immense challenges that Dr. King faced in his lifetime as well, namely racial tensions and political unrest. Dr. King's compassionate leadership and commitments brought change to this nation unlike anything we had seen before. If Dr. King were with us today, I'm sure we would be turning to him for comfort and guidance. The principles that Dr. King communicated in his words and demonstrated through his actions on a national level should be the principles we strive for on our local level. Those principles should not be remembered and spoken about only one day of the year, but invoked through our words and actions daily. Finally, I want to thank the members of the MLK Commission and the Commission on Community Relations and Development who worked tirelessly throughout the year to improve the City of Goldsboro for the betterment of all citizens. Their effort to promote diversity and equality is never ending. Thank you.
Hello, I'm U.S. Congressman G.K. Butterfield, representing the 1st Congressional District of North Carolina. I bring greetings to you in Goldsboro and Wayne County. Thank you so very much for your friendship. Thank you for allowing me to say a few words to you today about the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But before I do that, let me just say that my congressional district has been redrawn. The district boundaries are now different. Years ago, I represented Wayne County, but it was taken away from me in 2011 when the lines were redrawn. But I'm happy to report to you that the lines have been drawn again, and Wayne County is back in my congressional district, and I now represent all of Wayne County. And so you're going to be seeing a lot of me in the months and years to come, and thank you so very much for letting me just come to you today by way of video to say just a few words. The life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. cannot be adequately described in minutes or even hours. Dr. King's vision and leadership saved this nation from ruin. And so celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day is celebrating an iconic figure who God placed on this planet at that point in time, and he helped save this nation from itself. Dr. King's work began in Montgomery, Alabama, December of 1955, when he came into the city at 29 years of age and assumed the pastorate at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. The community needed a leader in the Montgomery bus boycott. Rosa Parks had just refused to give up her seat, and so Dr. King, at age 29, was drafted to be the leader of this movement, and the movement was successful. It lasted for more than a year. The bus company was forced to desegregate its buses, and because of that, Dr. King was thrust upon the national stage as a national civil rights leader. 29 years of age. national civil rights leader. And Dr. King then began to get recognized. And in 1960, as John F. Kennedy was running for president, he reached out to Martin King and asked Dr. King for his support. King said to Kennedy that he would support him, but there had to be a commitment to civil rights and voting rights for African Americans, and Kennedy agreed. He agreed to this deal. Kennedy was elected in November of 1960, took office January of 61, but nothing happened. No civil rights bill, no voting rights bill, nothing happened. When Dr. King approached President Kennedy about it, Kennedy said that he had not reneged on the promise, but he had to deal with Russia. He was preoccupied with dealing with Khrushchev and the Cuban Missile Crisis and other things that were threatening American security, and that he needed to have patience. Dr. King did not have patience. He then organized the 1963 March on Washington, along with labor leaders, A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin and Roy Wilkins from the NAACP and others, organized the 1963 March on Washington. And that march demanded a civil rights bill. And it was successful. It was successful. The march ended with an eloquent speech from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that we have all heard, the I Have a Dream speech. Because of the march, Kennedy had to reconsider his refusal to support a civil rights bill. On September 15th, just a few weeks later, the 4 little girls were bombed in a church in Birmingham, Alabama. And by this time, President Kennedy was really, really embarrassed and decided to fully embrace civil rights for African Americans. And then on November 22nd, 1963, a few weeks later, President Kennedy himself was assassinated. That was a very dark and difficult moment in American history. President Lyndon B. Johnson, or Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, becomes president and immediately embraces a civil rights bill and ushers that bill all the way to a final passage in the Congress. The Civil Rights Bill was passed in 1964, and Dr. King does not get all of the credit for the Civil Rights Bill, but he certainly gets a major portion of the credit for helping to demand the passage of the Civil Rights Bill in 1964. Finally, the Civil Rights Bill did not include a voting rights component. It was only about public accommodations. And so this time around, Dr. King started demanding that President Johnson pass a Voting Rights Act. President Johnson didn't want to do it in the beginning because of political factors, but King insisted that President Johnson do it. And that's when King and John Lewis created and launched the Selma to Montgomery March in Selma, Alabama. That was a very traumatic march. All of you have read about it over the years. In January of 1965, John Lewis was almost beaten to death on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, because he was demanding a voting rights bill that had been promised by the previous president. Well, nothing happened. And that's when Dr. King went to President Johnson and demanded that he embrace strong voting rights for African Americans. And President Johnson capitulated, decided to embrace voting rights because of Dr. King's demand. And finally, on August 6th of 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed into law. That's why we can have mass voter participation by African Americans in this country, because no longer are there barriers to registering to vote for African Americans in this country. Just look at the success that you've had in Goldsboro and Wayne County in voter participation and African Americans being elected to office. It was because of the strong work, the dedicated work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and so many others in the civil rights movement. So thank you for honoring the life and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I look forward to working with you in the months and years to come. Please stay safe in this pandemic. COVID-19 is still with us. The vaccine has been distributed to Wayne County and is being administered to those who are most at risk, and it will be administered to every single American in the next few months. Stay strong. I hope to see you soon. God bless you. Your Congressman.
Martin Luther King's Day is recognized as a national holiday on Dr. King's birthday. But for me, The holiday pays homage and represents honor to a lot of African Americans who fought the fight of justice, human and civil rights for many decades, long before Dr. King received the torch to carry. I too, Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker sister. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. I laugh, eat well, and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. December the 5th, 1955. Dr. King spoke to his supporters of the Montgomery bus boycott, and I quote, "If you will protest courageously and yet with dignity and Christian love, when the history books are written in future generations, the historian will have to pause and say, there lived a great people, a Negro people, who injected new meaning and dignity into the veins of civilization. There lived a great people, a Negro people, who injected new meaning and dignity into the veins of civilization," unquote. I too am America.
Hello, my name is Raymond Edward Smith Jr. I am a representative in the North Carolina General Assembly representing House District 21, which encompasses Sampson and Wayne counties. I come before you today humbly to talk about a man that is near and dear to my heart and should be in all the hearts of this nation. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., a pioneer, a saint, a man of peace. One of my favorite quotes comes from one of his mentors, which is Gandhi. Gandhi said, "If you want to find yourself, lose yourself in the service of others." That is a quote that has manifested with me and has led me throughout my career. I come from a very loving home where I had a mother and a father. And in this day and time, those things are some things you just cannot take for granted. My mother and father both worked very hard. My dad was a United States Marine. My mother was an educator. And they built a home that was loving, caring, and nurturing, and prepared me for the world. That's not everyone's story, but that's my story, and I'm absolutely proud of it. One of the things that I'm also proud of is growing up here in this community. The city of Goldsboro and Wayne County raised me. The teachers, the coaches, the mentors, the people in the neighborhood, those were all important characteristics to my development. But let me go back to a time that reminds me and is very reminiscent of today. In 1969, as a fourth grader here in the city of Goldsboro, we had a great experiment to take place, and that experiment was called integration. I was in the fourth grade, and I remember vividly the time when I met the first white children that I had ever played with in my entire life. I don't recall there being any major problems. I don't recall there being any major issues, but I do recall my mother, who was a teacher at the high school, stating that there were troubles, that there were problems, that there were fights, there were disagreements. And I do recall vividly the day that Martin Luther King Jr. was killed. I was a 7-year-old child, but I remember that day vividly because it struck fear in my heart. And it was sad to see my mother and my father in the state that they were in. So when I tell you that the same feeling that I had in 1969 and during the time that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, I'm getting that same feeling all over again. I'm wondering, have we progressed in those 50 years? Have we moved forward? I say we have, because I'm an example of that. I represent you in the General Assembly. I help to make the laws for the state of North Carolina. And I do believe in this country, because if I had not, I would not have sacrificed myself as a United States Army soldier fighting for this country. I believe in this community. I believe that there is a path forward, but those of us who know better are going to have to do better. And in order for us to do better, we're going to have those very difficult and hard conversations. Those conversations that make each and every one of us very uncomfortable. But until we do that, and until we're willing to do that, we're going to still have these problems. And I'll leave you with this thought. I, you, me, we. Together we can make it happen. Thank you.
Acts 16, verse 25, but at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing. Today, ladies and gentlemen, I want to encourage you to not lose your song. This experience for me was extremely difficult to prepare for. That while we honor the life, legacy, and work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we must do so against the potentially darkest, most dreadful season of my natural existence. We have seen a year of COVID and quarantine. Me and our team, as well as so many others across our city and our country, serving families who have been impacted by this dreadful disease called COVID. We have gone through uncertainty, economic downturn. This is what I would certainly say is a dark day, and I want to suggest midnight is most certainly here. The reality is today my boys, Christian, Mason, and Langston, are even here with me. And they're now becoming of age where daddy is no longer other people's preacher and pastor, influencer, encourager. But more than ever, my words are essential workers in their lives, and my accountability is increased. But considering the recent seasons, it's become more difficult to be an encourager, to constantly speak well of, and to be a source of hope. Much like many of you in this season, it's become difficult to hold on to your song. For the day is dark and midnight is here. But might I encourage you, don't lose your song even in the darkest moment in season. Music is power. Music, it lifts moods. It combats depression. Music improves the blood flow. It lowers levels of stress-related hormones and eases pain. But music can improve outcomes for patients even after surgery. It was the late, great Louis Armstrong who said, "Music is life itself." Bob Marley said, "One good thing about music is when it hits you, you feel no pain." Aretha Franklin said, "Music does a lot of things for a lot of people. It is transporting for sure. It can take you right back, years back, to the very moment certain things happen in your life. It's uplifting, encouraging, and strengthening." And it was in this very moment, this very season, in the midnight hour, that Paul and Silas found strength through their song, even in their midnight season. In Acts 16:25, but at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing. And you're probably wondering, in such a difficult and even potentially dark day, how do you suggest that I keep my song? Ladies and gentlemen, there is this thing called double entendre. Double entendre goes way back, even to the days of slavery, when some of our ancestors would sing songs like "Sweet Low, Sweet Chariot." The idea to us is of celebration. To them, it was an opportunity of great escape. They would sing songs like "Down by the Riverside," suggesting that if you were to escape and dogs were to get on your trail, to allow yourselves to trouble the water as God would trouble the water. They're communicating that if you jump in the water, you will then throw off the scent of the dogs who are coming after you. This idea of double entendre. How can we keep our song in this? Dr. Martin Luther King was a gifted double entendrist. Even in his most famous speech, "I Have a Dream," he communicates these ideas: let freedom ring, Let freedom ring in the Smoky Mountains. Let freedom ring in the Stone Mountains. I don't know if you've ever considered this meant one thing to one group of people and an entirely different thing to another. For in that day, the Stone Mountains, the Great Smoky Mountains, were generally the home site of some of the largest, most white supremacist groups in that day. So when he communicates, allow freedom to ring in the Smoky Mountains and the Great Mountains, he's suggesting an overturning of systems. And if there's any hope we can find today in what I believe to be dark and dear and dangerous times, I believe that we're seeing an overturning of systems for the good of all humanity. We are enduring a moral midnight, whether right or wrong is becoming seemingly more difficult for people to understand. We're enduring a historical midnight that if you don't know your history, you're often positioned to duplicate and or repeat it. We're experiencing mental, emotional, and even social midnight. We have yet to even see the long-term effects of this dreadful season of quarantine and COVID-19 on humanity and life thereafter. But the reality is, as dark as the season may be, and as bland and sometimes desiring to give up as I can feel, because my parents, Gregory and Brenda Jones, didn't give up, I can't give up. Because Rosa Harton, my grandmother, didn't give up, I can't give up. Because Dorothy Jones, my grandmother, didn't give up, I can't give up. Because John and Johnny Lewis didn't give up, I can't give up. My ancestors didn't give up, I can't give up. The City Church of Goldsboro, you haven't given up, I can't give up. And because some of my dearest and closest friends of other hue have not given up and remain in the fight, I want to suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, we can't give up. For that reason, we go to this song that we just can't give up now. But we've come too far from where we started from. For no one told us that the road would be easy. But I don't believe he's brought us this far to leave us. You can't lose your song. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was right. That we shall overcome because Carlyle was right. That no lie can live forever. That truth crushed to earth will rise again, as William Bryant said. That truth is forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet the scaffold sways the future, and behind them unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. You can't give up now. That if a man can write a better book or preach a better sermon or make a better mousetrap than his neighbor, even if he builds his house in the woods, the world will make a beaten plan and path to find him at his door. You cannot afford to lose your song, for it is your song that produces your suddenly. The Bible says in Acts 16, 24, 25 and 26, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God at the darkest point of the day, praying and singing hymns to God. And because they held on to their song, in spite of, it is in verse 26, we find a suddenly. And I believe that as a country, that as a world, as a people, we are preparing ourselves to enter into a season of suddenly. Before I bid you adieu, I leave you with this. I have, unfortunately, good news, but I also have bad news. I'll give you the bad news first. The bad news is that I most certainly believe that we're in a midnight season. But the good news is I believe we're in a midnight season. Do you see that? Double entendre. The bad news is we're in a midnight season. But the good news is we're in a midnight season. That as dark as it may seem, as damaging as it may seem, as painful as this season may have seemed, we are one moment, 1 minute, 1 month, 1 day. We are just an avenue away from inching away from that place that we call midnight into that thing that we call morning. I want to encourage you. It is midnight, but morning is here. As a result, I leave you with this song, and I hope to my dear believers, I don't cause any ruckus with this. At this point, I can't leave you with a hymn. This point, I can't even leave you with a bit of an old school choir song. I want to leave you with the word from the West Coast prophet, Kendrick Lamar, that we are going to be all right if you just don't lose your song.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Myelle Thompson, the Chair, Commissions on Community Relations and Development. The board and I would like to say thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be a part of our virtual MLK Day. We hope that you have enjoyed this virtual event, and again, we would like to say thank you. I'd like to leave you with a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. If you cannot do great things, you can do some small things in a great way. And again, thank you and take care.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the saved and whole, unborn has died, yet with the steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughter, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee, shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our name.